Today we're very fortunate to have Judith Taylor here. She is well known by most of you. She's a local resident, an artist, a teacher, and highly admired by all. We're very fortunate to have this program today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I'm so happy to be here. So, I think this is, I hope this isn't a bait and switch. It was advertised, promoted as stories, and it started out that way, and then it took me someplace I didn't expect to go. But I hope it will engage you as a story. And louder. I get comfortable, and really thank you for coming. I honestly intended this presentation to be something like The Moth mixed with a little bit of TED and some stand-up comedy. But it got away from me, and it took me in unexpected directions. Actually, I shouldn't have been surprised. Reality is dynamic, and a real story can't be conclusive. It can only be interacted with, and I'm still dancing with this story. Does a story exist before we tell it? In telling a story, do we create it? I wish I could tell you this story, but I'm just discovering it and maybe creating it myself. When you were a kid, did you have a favorite story, folktale, myth, fable, family legend? One of my favorite books began with a bedtime scene, and the children were snuggled like puppies around their mother, who before opening the book reaches up and turns the clock on the mantle to face the wall. I can't remember what came next, but that clock facing the wall stayed with me. For years, I tried to locate the book it was in, but no one could help me, not even one of my favorite reference librarians, whose name was Mrs. Chase, and I thought that was terrific. I finally gave up looking for the book, and it seemed like enough to have the back of the clock up there on the mantelpiece. Whenever a story is told, it becomes night. Like nomads gathered around a campfire, we gather around a story, our backs to the boundless dark. In a story's light and shadows, we see one another and see ourselves. Woodstock is a spirited town that welcomes art, and I feel very lucky to live here. Still, I'm reluctant to call myself an artist. I do what I do to get at the meanings of things, to figure out the work I'm supposed to be doing and how to do it. It's hard for me to limit myself to a single medium. The truth, most of the time, it's hard to limit myself, to focus myself, period. So I use whatever mediums feel necessary, not just to get at what I hope to get at, but to keep me interested in whatever I'm doing and whatever I've started. There's a story. Many stories, ancient and new, start in chaos and continue with a perilous journey. Think about some of the stories you may know. Starting our own stories can feel perilous. The word start itself is scary. Start doesn't just mean to begin. To start means to react with a sudden, involuntary, and sometimes violent reaction. Do it, see what it feels like. Have you ever started? Yeah. To start means to become forced out of place. A plank starts up from the floor. To start a thing means to be responsible for it during its early stages of development. By starting into my story, I risk being forced out of place, being made accountable, exiled. The possibility of losing myself is scary. Not knowing what I might find is scary. My dad and I weren't close, but I could make him laugh, and that was almost enough, being his comical sidekick. After Dad died, it fell on me to clean out his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with shelves sagging under double rows of books stacked one behind the other. Cartons bulging with letters, documents, photographs, postcards, canceled stamps from all over the world. Closets crammed with antique hardware, cameras, keys, gummed labels, mimeographs, styluses, slide projectors, film strips, reels of 8mm film. There's more. Engraved pillboxes, cufflinks, watches, fountain pens, and intricate hinged metal devices for who knows what. While Dad was alive, I knew about the photos, but the rest of it, yeah, I knew it existed, but I never felt okay asking about it. I also knew about Dad's coin collection. He spent countless hours with those coins and showed them off with enthusiasm that I wished he would sometimes show for me. Sorting through my dad's stuff offered clues about why, maybe, possibly, he loved those coins. They weren't just tokens of his travels or an investment that might one day benefit his wife and 3 daughters. Each coin had graven images, dates, details, and grooved edges to examine, evaluate, and classify. The coins were Dad's refuge, a defense against the forces of chaos that included the 4 complicated women he lived with. Realizing this about my father made me realize something about myself. I'm also a collector. I collect books, artifacts, dried botanicals, bones, feathers, antique tools, texts, textiles, intricate hinged devices, vintage garments, quotations, words, and yes, coins. And somehow, all of it seems meaningful. Have you ever had the feeling that living the life you wanted to live might happen if you just had enough storage space? Among Dad's stuff was a bundle of small cardboard frames that numismatists used to store coins. Thinking these frames might someday be useful, I brought them home, stowed them in a box labeled Possibilities, and forgot about them. A few years later, they showed up when I was gathering supplies for a craft workshop that Yael was teaching. She didn't need the frames, so they landed on my desk, and they stayed there until one day, ding! What if I used the frames to store images of things? Could I then maybe let the things go? One by one, I began photographing my possessions, or sometimes set an object directly on a copier and hit copy. I made images not just of my stuff, but anything that caught my attention, often before I understood why it caught my attention. I reduced each image, trimmed it, and sealed it into a frame, and then I learned these are called flips. Do any of you know about these as flips? And I tossed the flips into a cigar box, and I filled one box, and then another, and even more. Some of the images in the frames were hard to decipher. What if I forgot what they represented? So I numbered each flip and wrote a description of it that I logged into a notebook. I put the numbered flips into a pocket of a vinyl page. This is the kind that are used for storing slides, and put the pages into a loose leaf binder. As flips accumulated, I noticed recurring patterns and motifs. A new flip would echo an earlier one, and I'd think, that's what that's about. So I began cross-referencing the flips. While doing this, I was also collecting books and articles about collectors and collecting, and also keeping a journal about what I was doing. Writing about the flips conjured memories I didn't know I had. And sometimes I avoided writing because I didn't feel ready for what I might learn. But I learned that I could count on writing to teach me what I needed to know in order to cope with what I was learning. And the project involved so many different tasks that could be done in brief bursts of focus. I was never bored. Didn't know if what I was doing was worthwhile, but I promised myself to keep doing it for a year or until I'd made 1,000 flips, whichever came first. At first, I kept the work private, but it was so interesting to me that I had to share it with Dove and Yael and Jessie. Afterwards, each of them offered me material for a flip. It was very, very tempting. But because of their offers, I learned how private this work needed to be. Like dots on a pointillist's canvas, the little images were beginning to merge into something big. Samuel Beckett said, "To find a form to accommodate the mess, that is the job of the artist now." To find a form to accommodate the mess, that is the job of the artist now. And isn't it the job we all have to do? The form accommodating my mess wasn't like anything I'd ever seen, except, of course, my father's coin collection. Was it art? Making it felt a lot like the work of making art. It was challenging, risky, playful, and it was leading me who knew where. Did I need to know where it was heading? Did I want to know? The questions kept me going. For example, a flip that looked like a tiny specimen viewed through a microscope also looked like a remote planet seen through a telescope. How was that possible? While scrutinizing my possessions, was I actually distancing myself from them? And this, when I couldn't squeeze a whole image into a frame, I wondered what fraction of an image would still express a whole story. And this, how personally revealing was I willing to be? The flips began to change. The first one I altered to hold a double portrait of my twin sisters when they were about 2 years old. It wasn't until I had glued the photo into the flip that I noticed how much the little modified frame looked like a single cell suspended in the process of mitosis, a process that never seemed to happen for these sisters. The frame revealed the shape of the story that shaped their lives. Soon I wasn't only modifying frames, I was also sealing flattish objects into them. Seeds, fibers, tiny bones, charred paper. Then I realized that by replacing the stiff cellophane pane with a pouch made of plastic wrap, I could frame chunky items, beads, pottery, small devices. This made me remember my 4th grade social studies report with charts and maps, and each page backed on a piece of colored construction paper, plus extra pages on which I glued plastic capsules filled with dried corn, beans, rice, and cotton balls. Maybe you can guess what the social studies course was about. 60 years later, I read this by Carl Jung. What you did as a child that made the hours pass like minutes, herein lies the key to your earthly pursuits. Earthly pursuits. Stuff. Was my life going to be about stuff? And my work, was it going to be about stuff? What about beauty and transcendence and goodness? I began to pay very close attention to the kinds of art and poetry and music that drew me in, made me laugh or weep or feel grateful. The common thread in all of it, no matter how radical or provocative or mundane or unexceptional, was that it was made by brave people who dared to say, "This is what I do." Could my obsessive, idiosyncratic, self-involved exercise possibly mean anything to anyone? Then we moved from suburban Illinois to Woodstock. Mountains, mindfulness, hospitality, sustainability, mountains. A fresh start and a sense of urgency. If not now, when? And if now, what? Kafka said, all you are seeking is seeking you. My new friend Nancy brought me a gift. Judith, I thought you'd like this. How did she know? The little mouse skull, my tiny little Yorick, stayed on my desk until one day, ding! Using dried botanicals, bones, and feathers, I made 3 tiny masks that were welcomed at Artistry and launched what felt like an extended play date with Psyche. I didn't know where the work was coming from, only that I had to be there when it showed up. And after a few years, I noticed recurring patterns, motifs. A new piece would echo an earlier piece, and I'd think, that's what that's about. I also became aware of my growing desire to create work that invited some kind of interaction. Dancing boots, rattles, whistles, a card game, interesting, it was a game Memory, a fur-lined mailbox, surprise packages, garments, painted stones, and a sling, inscribed kindling meant to be burned in a wood stove, instruments for sorcery and maybe torture, a serpent shedding its skin. That's what I wanted to do, shed my skin, spark encounters without filtering ideas through objects, maybe not even through words. Dance, music, mime, none of those felt like a good fit. And what did I even have to say? My questions led me back to the flips. It's an ancient idea that to name a thing is to begin to know it. And I wanted a name for this project. So I started with numismatics. That seemed like a good place to begin. How about numismadness? That wasn't it. What if I took neurosis and wrapped it around numismatics and got numismarosis. So, okay, it was getting closer. And not long after that, when I was doing this, I was reading an article and it said the universally accepted word to denote spirit is pneuma. 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 Was there anything spiritual about this work that I was doing? All you are seeking is also seeking you. So recently a friend introduced me to this book. It's really an amazing book. Do any of you know it? The American Heritage Dictionary of Indo-European Roots. You can look up a word in the back and then look up all the root for that word will tell you all the other words in the language that have some connection with the word that you've looked up. So I looked up numismatics. You know that means coin collecting. And the root is nem, N-E-M, and the root meaning is to allot. But here are some other words that are also come out of that same root. Nimble, nemesis, economy, astronomer, nomad, namaste. Namaste. Is this what it means to live in the layers? To be mindful of the dynamic content of words? Our possessions, the things that we live with, that we surround ourselves with, they are part of our living lexicon. They make life rich and strange. Archaeologists read layers of earth and broken pots. Our possessions hold histories about who we were, who we are, and who we hope to be. Excavating our possessions, trying to find out what they mean, to read them, this is not self-indulgence. To archive is political. I curate my possessions not to be remembered by them, but to bear witness to my experience and to learn my story. Getting to know a story is to begin an ongoing interaction with it, and that's what's necessary in order to share it. And sharing our stories is what we're here for. It's what we need from one another. Our sharing has an ethical dimension. It shifts the focus from I to we. Sharing stories is how we're human together, and this makes our sharing sacred. So yes, that silent P stays in. I began with a question. Does a story exist before it's told, or do we create a story by telling it? And the answer is yes. A story is born when we are born, and it grows as we grow. By telling our story, we discover it, and we discover ourselves. We create our story, and we are created by it. The back of the clock can't tell me the time, but its ticking tells me that I live in time, and time is passing. Past, present, and future meet in a story, and story time lasts a lifetime. We're all storytellers. We're all mystics. We're all lovers. A story is a mystery and a love letter. We can't know where it might lead, and mine led me here. So, and you're here too. And I have some quotations, I'm quotacious, that we could look at together. I have flips if you'd like to take a flip and consider, is there something in your own life that you might want to either preserve or excavate or analyze or try to read as though it were a text? Do you have any questions? Have you, that's what I have to share with you. David,
So what came first, the 1,000 flips or the year?
1,000 flips or the year?
You said you were going to
You
do...
know something? I don't remember. And I think I just kept going for
Oh,
a
okay.
while. But, and I did accept one flip from each member of my family. Margaret.
Did you ever edit your flips, like decide, you know, why did I put that in there? And go back and get that out and think, I want this instead.
No, I didn't. Once it was in, it was
It was
in.
done.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to have a philosophy behind it right there.
And so I think that that's what our stories are good for. Even the ones that we would change, it's interesting to think, well, why would I change it? And what does it, maybe it sheds light on something else.
Suppose you got a better mouse skull.
Pardon?
Better mouse skull. I was thinking, suppose you got a better specimen than the one you put in the flip, see? You might want to take this one and substitute, or not? No.
It sounds like you've started in your own story.
No, I was just wondering if that was part of it. Was you said you made comparisons between flip and flip, right?
Just referencing
Yes.
some to see. One of them has little bits of broken glass, and they're very colorful and beautiful. And they were from Yael's bead making kit. And a few months later, I saw some beautiful little pieces of wool in Jessie's knitting basket. And I collected some of those, and I thought, well, there must be something about the variety, the colors that interests me. And here they are from my two interesting children.
Judith, it sounds like you have an index to your psyche. Have you thought of a table of contents?
So, is that a serious question?
You know me. Do I ever ask anything else?
I can't imagine what that would be.
It feels like an analogy for life itself, that what happened, happened, and it isn't changed retrospectively. You might see it with different eyes as you age, but what is.
Yes, so there's actually, because I want to share one other thing with you. In 1992, Václav Havel spoke in Davos, and he was speaking to politicians. And this was actually in March of 1992. And his address was printed in a newspaper. And I read something in there that had a profound effect on me, and it still does. And I guess that's the point that I'm hoping to make. And if I haven't made it today, I need to learn how to make it. So this is something that Havel said. We have to release from the sphere of private whim such forces as the natural, unique, and unrepeatable experience of the world. First-hand personal insight into things, the courage to be oneself, and to trust one's own subjectivity as one's principal link with the subjectivity of the world. What I would like to advocate, what's really feels so valuable to me, is to find ways to share our stories with one another. I really believe that's what we need, not just at the Moth or in TED Talks, but Havel is saying, when everything else, technology has failed and maybe different systems are disappointing, we really need to speak with one another, and we need to speak out of our own experience, whatever that is. Jack?
You translated the ephemeral feeling to this that comes with a broken mug, or just a sort of a tangible object, and you distilled it and honored it in this way of making it haiku.
Thank you.
Judith, I think of you as a poetic archaeologist who is bearing witness to her own life in these wonderful miniature images. It's very touching and wonderful. Thank you.
Here.
Why do you use the word story, which seems to me retrospective, when so much of your work that you're reporting, is absolutely present? There's so much, all the energy that you're releasing is focused on the working of the mind, the working of the flipping, the way in which things move spontaneously in unexpected ways. But why do you use the word story? Because story is retrospective.
What can you suggest? A different word, or I see story as ongoing, as it's not conclusive. It is. I should look it up here. It seems like it is a dynamic thing, like a myth. It's either alive or it doesn't have meaning.
It's like the end of the four quartets. To come again and find it for the first time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
And
I think
people
that's right on.
who write story or tell story habitually, as I tell story within habitually, I always have. And it's alive, it is my life, and so my life is always on two levels. It's the life I'm leading, and it's my observation of it within, which caused me at the age of, say, 9 to embarrass myself mightily in some kind of a running around and hiding game by bursting forth and saying, "Suddenly," which came out of the told story. It didn't come out of the game. I discussed this with Chuck Gunderson one day, after he'd written one of his really nice pieces in the Standard. And he said, yes, he lived that way too. He's always living his life, and also the observer, the narrating observer at the same time.
So I'm going to share a story. You're being so polite, and I'll share an actual story. Okay. This is called Lost and Found, a glove story. My daily walk through Centennial Park is a 2-mile loop that begins and ends at our front door. Sometimes I hike into the woods or retrace a stretch of road, though a single circuit is usually enough to get me into a landscape that exists nowhere on earth. and coming home is like waking up from a dream. Sometimes while walking, I'm intensely aware of the earth smell, green spikes poking up through the concrete or mud. And on the road, I often find coins or small useful items. Last year was a good year for gloves. The first glove I turned up in a parking lot near the sledding hill. It was brown leather and brand new, with fawn-colored lining that said pure cashmere and made in Romania. I jammed the glove upright onto an iron post where it waved at passing cars. And half a mile down the road, I found that brown glove's mate. It was water-stained and stiff, but I plucked it from the snow and turned back to retrieve the first brown glove. On my way home, I tried to imagine how those gloves landed where I found them. I pictured a well-dressed, distracted mom leading her cranky toddler back to the car after an hour on the sledding hill. She buckles the tot into the car seat, slides behind the wheel, reaches for her gloves and realizes one is missing. Damn. She tosses the loaner onto the road, slams the door, guns the engine, and drives faster than is prudent to make it to the bank and the cleaners before hitting the market on her way home to get supper going before driving to the station to meet the 6:40 from Chicago. After a few days of snow and freezing rain, followed by mild weather, I found another pair of gloves, partially submerged in the slush. Holding them at arm's length, I carried the dripping gloves home, and they emerged from the wash, white, flecked with blue, and lined with fawn-colored cashmere. Now I had leather gloves for dress-up and cozy woolly gloves for every day. A week later, Yael came into the house and she was laughing. In town, she had noticed a pair of black mittens frozen to the sidewalk and pried them up from the ice and brought them home. What made her laugh wasn't that she found the mittens, but that she found herself taking it after me. The first time I told this glove story and mentioned that not long after finding that first pair of brown leather gloves, I lost them, my friend's laughter made me remember another pair of gloves that I had lost many years ago. Actually, they were mittens that my mother had knit for me when I was 10 years old. They were bright red except for the thumbs, which were black. Mom had run out of black wool. That was the joke, she said. So when I repeated her joke at school, some of my classmates looked at me like I was weird, but some of them laughed. And almost as much as I loved having those mittens, I loved being able to provoke the laughter. It was worth the funny looks. Then, one Sunday afternoon, on a rare family outing that included a movie at Radio City Music Hall and supper at a Chinese restaurant, as soon as my parents and sisters and I emerged from the theater, I realized that I had left those red mittens under the plush seat in the balcony. Tears filled my eyes as we all stood blinking in the late afternoon, but I knew that if I admitted my carelessness, my mother's scolding, my father's sighs, and my sister's scorn would unravel the bright day. So I said nothing, and as we trooped down Broadway toward Ruby Foo's, I lagged behind, feeling as lost as those mittens on the sticky floor of the balcony. The first pair of gloves that I found in the park enabled me to find the second pair, and that second pair led me back to those red mittens. Along with the mittens, I found the little girl who lost them, the woman who found them, and the work that these two people might do together. The black lab's paws, his front paws, leave the ground when the man yanks the leash and swivels the dog close to his side. They're moving at a good clip when we pass one another on the path in the park. Still, the man speaks. You're here every day, but you're never walking a dog. Without thinking, I reply, I'm walking my inner dog. We laugh and keep going in opposite directions, though now I knew what I hadn't known before, and it's the breed of my inner dog. She's a retriever. So, I just want to tell you, on the way over here, I lost the other dog. I had two when I left the house, and now I only have one. So, but I got the story I needed from the gloves. So, and now you're all part of it too. As I said, I'm quotacious. There are some quotes here if you'd like to look at them. And I try to express what I am trying to express in many different ways, and sometimes I depend on other people's words. And on the other side, there are some it's a Xerox copy of a page with some flips in it, if you're
Judith, did you actually get rid of the things that you,
Some of them I was able to do, and it's actually a very good way, because you keep the story, you keep a little photograph, and it's very well organized, and then you can get rid of the stuff, and you don't have to hold on to it. So here's the Flips album, and you're welcome to look through this. And here's the word, mesmerosis, done the way my mother would do it, in gold, gold embroidery. Jennifer.
And I say, I hope you continue to write.
Thank
It's
you.
just wonderful to listen to your
Thank
words.
you. And if anybody would like a flip and try and see what it's like, you're welcome to help us. Here, you can just pass them.
So Judith, this process has helped you kind of categorize things and find some enlightenment or some,
Yes.
connection to the I don't know the right words to say, but you said it was also important to share that with others.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, since this is such a personal, inventory, things that have attracted you, how do you bring other people into that, or have them see things perhaps through help them, realize their own, without going through that process themselves, I guess.
So when I teach writing, I say start with the things in your own life. What stories do they embody?
Yeah.
And when you begin to write, do you have things on your desk, things on your night table, things that you just like having around? They anchor something, some meaning for you, a history. Begin to explore.
It sounds like to me it's the process you share, not so much what has attracted you, but you want
Yes.
others to find not the similar things, but things in their own lives that
Yes.
have the same value that these
Yes.
have to you.
Yes.
You have this is so revelatory. You're so revelatory.
Would you like me to pass these on?
You have a relentless losing and finding. Finding and losing. You never give up.
Hugo.
Were there other things in your father's library or the room that you include things from your father's inventory of things in this?
No, I did not. I did not. What?
Why not?
Maybe for the same reason it all had to come from what was it that engaged me? What was the relationship?
Judith, have you thought of these as portholes, perhaps? The
Great.
journey into the subconscious.
I know that she has at least one flip that is a picture of a porthole, though.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.